Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. Now, as some of you may know, it's not cheap to keep Richplanet on the air, so we're currently looking for somebody to sponsor the TV show again in the future. Without the current sponsor, it would have been impossible to get the 9 PM slot that we currently have. So anyone with deep pockets who's willing to sponsor the TV show, please get in touch via the richplanet.net website. For those who attended the most recent speaking tour, you will know that I spoke a lot about subversion. I went through the results of a survey to find out which TV programs viewers believe are the most subversive and manipulative. I'm sure the results were probably not that surprising for some of you. Now, I'm asking you to take part in another subversion survey to try and find out the most subversive and manipulative false hero or role model. What do you mean by that, Richard? Well, if we look at former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov's subversion chart, we see that one of the ways of subverting an entire nation is to use what he calls false heroes and role models. These are people who are promoted in the mainstream media to the masses in order to manipulate the masses into following particular ideals, follow particular morals, beliefs, and live particular lifestyles which are subtly promoted by the fake role model. I could give you a list as long as one's arm of my particular favourite subversive fake heroes, but I want you to do it for me. Brian Cox. Now, who would you vote for? Please email me your suggestion and I will compile a league table of the most subversive heroes and role models. Don't forget to state why you think they are fake and why their fake behaviour is subversive. I look forward to reading your suggestions. Now, coming up on today's show, I will be speaking to some UFO witnesses who, in my opinion, have given some excellent accounts of unexplained activity. These witnesses are just the tip of an iceberg of hundreds of people who have recently reported their sightings to the richplanet.net website, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you. Now, you may have watched the first two programs in this series entitled The Mars Rover Hypothesis, in which I presented quite a lot of evidence suggesting NASA could be running one massive deception regarding their Mars rover programs. I've had a lot of feedback from these programs, some from people who have defended NASA and given alternative or perhaps conventional explanations for some of the Mars rover images. I've also had feedback from people who have given me more evidence, arguing the rover missions were faked, such as a detailed analysis including calculations for the parachute used to allegedly land the Curiosity rover on Mars. Now, after the first program aired, I emailed 5 Mars rover NASA scientists with links to the program, asking them if they could explain all the anomalies. Now, just 3 or 4 days after this, we had the Beagle 2 Found on Mars story come out, which just so happened to be found the day after our second Mars rover program aired. You just couldn't make it up, could you? I can also inform you that I actually received a reply from one of the NASA scientists who has agreed to answer my questions. He has so far answered one of them. I will be covering the Mars rover missions and the correspondence I've had with NASA in my upcoming lecture tour and looking at some of the feedback from viewers both for and against the hypothesis. A lot of people ask me about the forensic historians and how they're getting on. They're getting on fine. Now, they uncovered the comprehensive history of the 6th century ruler, King Arthur, who was the king of Glamorgan and Gwent. Some academics still actually try to persuade people that King Arthur was a fictional figure when Wilson and Blackett can actually take you to where he is buried. I caught up with Alan Wilson at his house in Newcastle a few months ago. See, Alan's here.
Check of the devil.
Alright, Alan? I'm just taking a bit of video because people keep asking me how you are.
Oh, I see. Well, I'm surviving.
Surviving?
Well, who keeps asking?
Well, fans of your TV shows.
I didn't know anything. So people are asking if I'm still alive, is that it?
Well, asking how you are.
They're not pushing up daisies. Is that it?
One of his enemies, Alan, said, how old is he now? He's 183. He should be in the box by now.
You can't afford to die, Alan.
I can't afford to go.
He said. That's the other enemy.
You'll sell me a ticket.
You ought to look, pal. I said, you ought to look, pal, because he just said, Stuart just said that he looks about 60. It could be another 20 years before he's in the box.
Have you
I've got a friend for life.
Yeah,
I have come for life for Stuart, right?
He's 60. Must be trying to reduce the bill.
There we go.
This is the Arthurian genealogy. King Arthur. Been up a while, that one. A few mistakes on there, though, isn't there, Alan?
One or two minor ones.
Minor ones.
Nothing much.
Nothing major.
You've got to understand that people who went to America were the ordinary folk, and the rich people were being given 10,000 acres and 5,000 acres of land by the king in America. As if the king owned America with the original 12 colonies.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the leading people out there were the aristocracy from here.
So
I'm getting old and slow, you know.
you've been to the doctors recently, Alan. I mean, what's because you had a bit of illness lately?
Yeah, nothing much.
But you're better now, are you?
No, nothing much. Yeah.
Nothing much.
No.
I'll have a cup of coffee, Baram, please.
Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about.
Nothing major to worry about, eh?
Yeah, I don't worry.
If you ask certain academic, you might call them, or university historians, they'll say that Arthur's a myth and that he never existed. That's what certain academics will actually say.
Well, that's because they're following a line of propaganda, a political propaganda line, which was really developed around 1840, 1850, which abandoned the ancient histories of Britain, and they really haven't done any research. If you do just a little research, it becomes unmistakable. Yeah. The land of charters were taken for the Pope to see them in, I think, 1108 and 1120, you know. So they're ancient charters, and they're acknowledged to be such.
Right.
We can get a copy of them, you know.
Yeah, and just to mention, for those who are new to Richplanet and new to Alan's work, Alan has identified many sites in South Wales that are significant to both the Dark Ages and sort of before the Dark Ages, BC, that the Welsh authorities and archaeological organisations, they don't want to touch. And Alan's been trying for a large part of his life to get these sites excavated and acknowledged. But
well, it's not. People are educated in school. They go to school 4 or 5 years old. They leave at 16 or 18. They go to college, and they're told a story. Let's call history is his story. They're told a story and a line of thinking, and they don't seem to be able to break out of that line of thinking. Mm-hmm. But if you read histories of Britain written before, say, 1820, and you read something written as a history of Britain after 1850, you're reading two completely different histories. Mm. Now that cannot be. Mm-hmm. You can't have a completely different history after 1850 and a completely different one before that date. It doesn't make sense.
No.
And the early histories have been abandoned. And they were abandoned in an era when Darwin sailed around the world and he came back with all sorts of information and said, hey, the world was not created about 7,000 BC, as it says in the Bible. You know, we've got the Darwin's theories of evolution. You had other sort of things breaking out at the same era. And so the church and everybody else was in a panic.
Alan's just shown me some books here, which are school books, children's books even.
1907.
1907. And they're full of references to Arthur, Alan.
Yes.
The Story of Gwent, Educational Publishing Company, Cardiff. So I'm just turning to this page here. So these books were in common use in schools in the 1920s. Arthur's first duty was to march against the Saxons. Collecting his forces, he marched towards Lincoln with Magwyn, King of North Wales, and Moerig, King of South Wales. Now, Moerig is Arthur's father. Yeah.
Well, his father, but South Wales usually means the West Wales, South West Wales.
Right. When the two armies met, Arthur inflicted a severe defeat upon the Saxons. Then, urging his chiefs to make a great struggle for their freedom, he assembled his increased forces and marched to Mount Badon to await another onrush of Saxon warriors.
So leave we Sir Lancelot in his lands, his noble knights with him, return again to King Arthur and to Sir Gawain. They made a great host, they number 3,000, and all of them made ready for their shipping to pass over sea. And they shipped at Cardiff. They sailed to Cardiff, where the great harbour is in the mudflat.
Today I've returned to Pontypool and I'm with Jeff Simmonds. Now Jeff Simmonds had a sighting a long time ago when he was just 16 years old in 1974. Fire away, Jeff.
Well, it was 1974, as we said. 16, just sort of left school. I was playing in a band. The sort of four of us were in a van in Blenavon, sort of about 6 or 7 o'clock, I would think. Got some chips because it was that time of day, and we decided to drive up to the top of the Fox Hunter, which was a local spot where people go to sort of look at the views. Got up there, sat in the van, eating chips. Summer's evening.
What sort of time?
I'd say it was about sort of 6 or 7 o'clock. It was
still light.
It's still light. It's a summer's evening. You can still see off into the distance, right across to the horizon, you know.
Right, because here in the valleys, sometimes you've got no visibility because of the cloud. Other times it's so it was clear day.
It was a beautiful day.
Right.
Clear blue skies, sun was still sort of shining, and we were sort of making plans for our future with the band. So we were sat just talking. Wayne, who was a little bit older than us, was the driver. He decided that he needed to sort of get out of the toilet and get out of the van and go to the toilet in front of the van, you know, which he'd done. Got back in the van, we had a row of spotlights on the front of the van, typical sort of band van in those days. And some sheep came up, so we sort of flashed the lights to frighten them off. And when the lights was flashed, I immediately seen a bright, what I thought was a star in the sky. And I took a closer look at it, and then there was another one alongside it, and all this sort of happened in a couple of seconds. I said, "Oh, I said two stars across it." To Simon, who was sat in the back of the van. Simon pointed his head around, and at that point we could see what was a cigar shape, and there was 4 lights in there. So we were all wondering what this was.
So just to interrupt you there, Jeff, 4 lights in a row.
Yeah.
So you could actually see some structure behind the lights as well, could you?
Yeah, there was the cigar shape, and
right.
within that cigar shape you could see the sort of 4 lights,
right.
which we knew were lights at this point.
Okay.
We all decided to get out of the van and have a closer look. By the time we'd got out of the van, the craft was over us. It was a circular craft, and it was about the size of a football field from memory. We were just in awe of it. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. And one of the things that struck me was how fast it had come across from that distance, because I think you can sort of see about 25 miles to the horizon with no interruption. So it had travelled all that distance by the time we got out of the van. We were looking up at it. There were some sort of pylons to the right hand side of us. We'd made our way across there because that's where it was above us there. At this point I thought there were like lights running around the outside of it, I could see. And then Wayne got back in the van and tried to start the van, but the van wouldn't start. And then what happened was something from the centre of the craft came out and dropped down into what was the lower car park. Now I didn't know what it was at this point because it was somewhere I'd never been, but Simon was living in the area. I said to him, "What's down there, Simon?" And he said, "Oh, it's just a lower car park." He said, "It's just a dingle down there." So at this point, this craft shot off and went towards Abergavenny, but didn't build up speed, no sound of it, just went and it was gone. And this other craft was down in the bottom now.
So something came out of the larger
craft,
field-sized craft. Okay.
When this craft shot off, the main one, the van started, and Wayne was shouting to us to get in the van and go. He wanted to go, and I said, "I'm going down there." I said, "I've got to know." Even though I was frightened, I was absolutely petrified what I'd seen. I had to go down and have a look to see what was down there. And I said to Simon, "How far is it to walk?" He said, "We can walk it. It's no problem." So Simon said he was coming with me, and then there's another boy with us, Yucca. He the other boy in the band. He said, I'm coming with you too, which left Wayne on his own. And then I think Wayne sort of realised that he was sort of the oldest one of us and he had to look after us and what have you. I think that's what it was. He agreed then to take us down. So we got in the van and we went down to the bottom car park. When we got down there, we parked the van, got out, and we could see this smaller craft that had come out, and it was like as if it was scanning the area.
So how high off the ground would it have been?
Well, at this point it was dark. It was getting dark, so it was difficult to see. I couldn't make out where the dingle was in comparison to where the craft was.
Right. So, but by the time you'd got down to this place, it had got dark.
It was getting dark because all you could see was like this light.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like a light underneath the craft,
mm-hmm.
and the craft was sort of scanning back and forth. And this went on for quite some time.
Did you get any impression of the shape of the craft?
Just circular again, I think.
Circular, okay.
Yeah.
And size? Obviously smaller than the larger.
Yeah, a
one.
lot smaller. Very difficult to say, to be honest.
Big enough for someone to be in it?
Yeah, I'd say that was possibly the case, because when it came out of the craft, it looked to be sort of maybe sort of 12 to 15 feet in diameter,
right.
I think.
So let's just go back to the larger craft. So there was some daylight at this point when it's come and hovered right over the top of you.
Yeah.
So what was the underside of it like? You say it was circular, the size of a football pitch, but can you give some detail of lights and texture?
There was lights around the outside of it, but the underside of it was all dark. It was all sort of like black.
Right.
I couldn't see any definition of what was there.
Right.
But again, it was, when we saw the main craft, there was a light sky, so it wasn't like it was black at this point. It was a light sky and it was a dark craft, but there was lights running around the outside of it.
Mm-hmm. And can I just ask, were they rotating or were they still? Can you remember?
They were running around.
So there was some movement of the.
There was some movement of light.
Right. Okay.
There was.
Yeah.
But no sound.
Right.
And as I say, when it took off, it didn't sort of build out, so it just went, right. And it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment that craft went, the van started. But when we were down in the bottom there, this thing looked like it was scanning the dingle. But as I say, because it was dark at this point, I couldn't make out how far off the ground it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I had this impression or this feeling that this craft was coming back behind us, the main one.
How close did you get to that thing that was scanning the land?
Difficult to say. We were in the bottom car park. We couldn't go any further because it was a dingle. We couldn't see.
So it's not changed that area any?
I don't think so. I mean, I haven't been up there for
right.
I don't know how many years.
Right. So you didn't wait until this smaller craft still there when you left?
It was still there when we left. Yeah.
Right. And
I tried to get Wayne to go back because once I knew there was a car behind us, I wanted to see what the outcome of this was.
Right.
But Wayne wasn't having any of it. I'm going.
Right.
So I then persuaded him to go to the local pub where my two older brothers were,
mm-hmm.
And tell them about it. And when we got there, a friend of theirs wasn't surprised that we'd seen this craft. And they named Richie Havens, and he said he wasn't surprised at what we'd seen because all the locals had sort of seen different lights in the sky and different sorts of goings on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And he also said that up here somewhere there's a magnetic field, and he said that it was his thoughts that they were attracted to that for some reason.
All right. You don't know why he thinks that, or you just something.
He seemed, because to start with, I was a little scared of him because I thought that maybe he was sort of taking the mick out of us a bit, but he wasn't. He was quite serious that he'd had lots of friends who told him about different stuff going on up here, lights in the sky and that sort of thing.
Location itself, do you know anything significant about it? I mean,
well, certainly interesting landscape, and it's well secluded. So if a craft was down in that dell, it wouldn't be picked up on radar, would it?
No, absolutely not.
Amazing how they seem to choose these remote, not far out the way, but fairly remote.
It was, I mean, from what Simon told me about it, was just overgrown sort of land. There was nothing up there of any significance, only in the fact that they called it the Fox Hunter because there was a famous racehorse, and when it died, they buried it up on the mountain, and the name of the horse was the Fox Hunter.
Right. And what about the other members of the band? I mean, are they still in the area?
Simon was sort of my age. Simon and I first met when we were about 11 or 12, playing in bands. He played guitar, I played drums. and we've been friends sort of ever since, really. But as life sort of moves on, you move on, you sort of you split up and you go your separate ways.
I mean, if we can't meet any of them, if you could get an email statement from them without actually feeding them your story.
Right, I'll do that.
Right, okay.
Because I've spoken with Simon a couple of nights ago, and he sort of, because I spoke to him about it a few years ago when I played in a band with him, and he didn't want to talk about it at that time. He just said, I don't want to talk about it.
Really?
Yeah. And Wayne, the oldest guy, he was the same. I mean, for the following day, he just did not want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But I spoke to Simon recently because I knew that this was going to happen, and he was sort of more open to willing to talk about it, you know.
So we're going to go out now and we're going to drive to the spot where the football field-sized circular UFO hovered over Jeff's van, and then released another craft below it, and we're going to go and film the dingle.
Okay.
Right, I'm with another UFO witness who's called Finn Handley, and he's from Monmouth in South Wales. Now then, Finn, you've had 2 or 3 sightings. Each time it's involved black triangles in some way or another. Yeah. Just give us the most prominent one first, and then you can give us the ones that happened earlier. You're a taxi driver.
Yeah.
So
between 10 o'clock and 10:30, and I was coming down the dual carriageway from a place called Goodrich, which is about a mile outside of Monmouth, or 2 miles. And as I came up to the traffic lights on the dual carriageway, kind of parallel to the centre of town in Monmouth, I noticed these 2 balls of light, what looked like 2 balls of light, hovering above the trees just to the right of the motorway. Maybe 50, maybe 40 metres away from me, because they were to the right of the motorway and just above some trees that are in Chippenham Park, which is right next to the motorway. So they were set back a little from the motorway and above these trees in the park. So I was looking at them while the traffic lights were red, and the traffic lights turned green. So I headed down the motorway, and I started to wind down my window so I could get a better look at these things. So as I drove past them with the window wound down, I was literally looking straight across the dual carriageway at these balls of light hovering above the trees. They were a matter of metres above the trees, maybe 5 metres. And they were 2 balls of light. One of them was below the other and slightly smaller than the other. So they were both roughly basketball size. I think the larger one was slightly larger than a basketball, and then the smaller one below it was maybe the size of a football or a little smaller than that, so about 2/3 the size of the one above it. And the smaller one had a large spike sticking out the right-hand side of it. I mean, seeing these 2 balls of light is bizarre enough, but seeing the spike coming out of one side of it, and it was kind of protruding out of one side, a sharp spike. Both balls of light appeared to be kind of fizzing, as if they were unstable, and I actually wanted to get a bit of distance from them. So I carried on driving while I was looking at this spike coming out one side. It looked like it was actually growing out, like it was extending in length a little bit. But I didn't kind of stop there to find out what was going on, because I didn't feel all that safe. So I carried on driving up to the slip road, pulled into the slip road, got out of the car, turned back to look at these balls of light, and now there were no longer 2 balls of light in there where they were. There were 2 large black triangles, and they were right next to each other, except that one was set back slightly from the other, as if they were in a staggered formation. And they were literally in exactly the same place where I'd seen the balls of light 10 seconds earlier. It must have taken me about 10 seconds to drive the car to the slip road and pull over and get out, maybe 15 seconds.
Can you give an estimate of size of these triangles?
Yeah, in the way I explained them on the night when I got home and wrote it all down, was that they were the size of each triangle was roughly the size of the roof of the petrol garage at the bottom end of Monmouth. Right. And that petrol garage has got 12 pumps. So you can imagine 12 cars parked underneath roughly each triangle. You know, if you squeeze all the cars together, you could fit about 12. And they were kind of dark grey, not really black. You know, you look at the stealth aircraft and that sort of thing. You look at the B-2 stealth bomber, even in daylight, in some of those air shows that you can look at on YouTube, it's like pitch black. These things were more slightly grey, so a very dark grey, but not totally black.
Can you remember any lighting on them at all?
So if you imagine that this was actually a triangular shape, and this is the back end, and the triangle point would be at the front end. If this is the back end of the triangles, there were 4, and they were obviously flat like this as they went along. There were 4 blue oblong-shaped lights along the back end in a row, and they were quite fat and quite prominent. And I could see they actually bulged out. Just you know, there was a bulge to them. They weren't kind of inset. They were bulging out, and they were turquoise blue and quite large compared to all the other lights, which were spread over the rest of the bottom, the underside of the triangle, and there were about 10 other lights of different colours but in a pattern. So if there was a green light on one side, there'd be another one opposite it on the other side. So it was symmetrical layout of lights, but lots of different colours. So I'm thinking they were kind of yellow, definitely white. There was a white light on each point. But there were also on the other side yellow, red, green, and these blue ones is what I'm thinking. But the layout of the lights underneath was quite complex, so I don't remember the exact layout, even though I drew it a rough estimation of what it was in my Photoshop recreation that I did on my computer the night it happened. But the one that I remember, the lights that I remember, were 4 oblong-shaped lights along the back end, which were very distinctive. And then as both of the triangles crossed over the motorway and they turned their back ends towards me, all of the lights changed to a white colour. All of the lights, as if someone just turned a dimmer switch and changed all the colours to white. Every single light on it faded to white on both triangles at exactly the same time. This was like these things were on rails, and they just went absolutely smoothly and perfectly exactly where they wanted to go, and there was no kind of a clue that they were, it wasn't like they were using air to keep them up. They were just went exactly, just like magnets, they went exactly where they wanted to go, and there was no kind of buffeting or moving up and down. And while they were hovering, it was like they were sat there on a rod, because they just did not move at all. But after about 5 to 10 seconds, they started to move across the motorway at about walking pace. It was quite slow how fast they moved. And I think it may have taken another 10 seconds for them to cross the motorway. As they went across the motorway, they actually extended in length. So they started off as equilateral triangles, pretty much identical to the other 2 times when I'd seen them, which we'll get into later. But as they crossed the motorway, the front was actually getting longer as it was moving slightly faster than the back end. In other words, they were elongating as they were moving. So by the time they got to about halfway across, they were now longer triangles, more like an arrowhead sort of shape than a equilateral triangle shape. They also went transparent, like the heat haze on a hot road. If you're looking at a hot road and you see this kind of rippling effect, it was like that sort of rippling effect, or looking at water when it's rippling. I could tell that they were still there, but they were transparent, and this lasted about half a second. It literally was like someone just pressed a button and then pressed it again at that sort of speed, as if, right, turn on the invisibility, now turn it off again. So it was very quick, but it was quite distinct and quite obvious, and again, both of them did it at exactly the same time. So both triangles went ripply and then went solid again, and this was all as they were moving across the road. And now one of them heads up the motorway towards Ross-on-Wye. It seemed to accelerate, but it didn't shoot off at really high speed. They were going at walking pace, and then it just started to pick up speed as it went off into the distance. And the other one had turned its back to me, and it went away a little while, and then for 10-20 meters, and then turned right and followed the Wye Bridge straight over the river and headed over towards Wysham. And interestingly, I've got some newspaper clippings. Other people saw the black triangles on that night, and one of them was a guy who lives in Wysham. I spoke to him on the phone about it afterwards. But the first sighting of these triangles happened in late 2007, and I've got the exact date. I'm thinking it was around 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. It was in the winter, so it was already dark. And as I was driving down the road, good visibility on the ground, but there was a thick layer of fog above, and I saw these 2 balls of light dropping out of this cloud layer, and they headed down behind the housing estate near my sister's house. As so I pulled the car up. I thought I might as well just park up at my sister's place. So I pulled around into her car park, got out of the car, looked back in the direction where I'd seen these balls of light dropping behind the estate, and lo and behold, out from the rooftops, from behind the rooftops, came these two black triangles. They were equilateral in size. They appeared to be quite small, maybe the size of a single-man jet fighter. At the largest, about that size. They seemed to be relatively high, maybe the height of Big Ben, and they both flew over my sister's house. They had white lights on each point, and no other visible lights apart from a light right in the centre, which was flashing, and this light was also white. So the flashing light on it, plus the fact that this all seemed a bit too good to be true, I put it down to being some sort of aircraft that I'd not seen before, but I knew deep down that these could be black triangles because I'd heard of black triangles before. Okay. And they were clearly triangular shaped. I didn't hear any noise. So yeah, and they just headed off towards the centre, in the direction of the centre of Monmouth, and that was that.
I have had similar accounts, in particular a guy called Eric Goring in Lincolnshire described almost exactly what you've just described. It didn't have the spike coming out of the orb though, but it had the materializing effect and the balls of light which seem to turn into a triangle, which sounds completely bizarre. Yeah. But maybe it's a stealth craft, maybe it's ET, who knows, but thanks very much.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Rich.
Richplanet Television is sponsored by mousemesh.co.uk, protecting air bricks in homes from uninvited guests.
I'm with a chap called Peter Winspear now, and he lives in Slough, and his sighting was in broad daylight in the summer of 2014. Is that right, Peter?
That's correct, Richard.
As I say, we're in Slough, although probably not pronouncing that as people pronounce it here. Right, now you are also an optical engineer, Peter. Just give us a bit of background of optical engineering and what that entails.
Yes, basically I work for a company in Windsor that specialise in ophthalmoscopes and other instruments for opticians when they examine eyes, and for some surgeons. And part of my work is the grinding and polishing of lenses and mirrors to fit in these instruments.
Right.
And
so you're very well up on optical instruments and what they can and can't see. And you've built your own telescopes over the years, so just tell us about that as well, Peter.
It's a hobby of mine. I like playing around with optics and building telescopes, so as an amateur astronomer I find I can't really afford some of these instruments and just prefer to build them myself.
Right. And what are the sizes of the telescopes that you commonly use now then?
The main one I use now is a 6-inch Newtonian reflector, which I built quite a few years ago. I did build a 12-inch Newtonian, which was rather large, but it suffered from being non-portable.
Right. And
in the end, it just became a liability. So I actually went back to the 6-inch, being a more portable instrument.
Right. Now, you actually observed this particular UFO through the telescope, and we'll come on to that in a moment.
Yes, it was evening time, but broad daylight still, and come home from work. As a family, we were relaxing in the garden, sitting at a table, when I literally just spotted this object in the sky. I tend to have a knack for that sort of thing. It's something that's out of place, and I said to my family members that were there, well, what's that? And it wasn't moving. It was bright, like a very bright star, but I knew obviously it couldn't be a star unless it was a nova or something.
A skeptic might say, well, that's obviously Venus because it's the brightest star in the sky.
Well, it doesn't wash with me. Being an amateur astronomer, I knew exactly where Venus was, and it was not visible at that time.
Right.
And also know what it looks like through a telescope as well as a naked eye. So I then decided to get the binoculars quickly to have a more detailed look, because initially I thought it might be something like a supernova, which for an amateur astronomer that's quite an exciting.
Right.
We're well overdue one in this galaxy, and so with the 7x50 binoculars I looked at it and could see that it was a dumbbell shaped object. I thought, oh, this is intriguing. And I watched it for about 3 or 4 minutes with the binoculars, and then was debating whether or not I should try and grab a telescope. And as you know yourself, these things very rarely hang around. You know, even reaching for binoculars is usually too long.
Right.
But in the end, you know, although I'm not going to get any more information from these binoculars, I'm going to risk it. So off I went and dragged out the what I considered would be the most suitable telescope I have at that time, which is a short focus, wide field refractor, 80mm object lens, designed to give a wide field of view, but not particularly high magnification. And I figured at the time that I would probably be tracking a moving target, and this would be the best, you know.
And just to point out, you are on the air traffic flight path here.
Oh yes.
And it's very restricted airspace. Just tell us about that before you continue with your sighting.
Yes, we are literally 2 miles from the end of the north runway at Heathrow here in Langley, and it's restricted airspace because the planes are either taking off over here or landing depending on the wind direction. We also have the main air corridor over the country going north, where traffic merges from the continent or wherever and swings northwards, and they're high-flying aircraft which are a very common sight, and you know, you can't mistake them for anything. Which is one of the things I noticed this particular time, was the complete absence of any of these aircraft flying around up there while this sighting was going on.
So you get your telescope out, would you put it in the back garden, or do you have it in the house?
Literally put it on the lawn and got it into position, picked a low-powered eyepiece and managed to find the object again. It had moved in between me getting the telescope, but I found it again, was able to focus on it and could see that it was actually, I don't know what it was.
Right. So it was a glowing light the shape of a dumbbell, is that what you...
It was, I wouldn't say it was glowing or self-luminous or reflective. It was light, because obviously the sun was still in the sky. There were no colour variations, it was just this golden, orangey yellow. Right.
And you've done a sketch for us, which we can put up on the screen. So just, how long did you observe it for with the telescope then?
For a further 5 or 6 minutes.
Right. And there was some very strange sort of dynamics following that then, just explain that.
Yes, well, no sooner had I centred it with the telescope that I observed a small sphere detach from underneath, hang there for a second or two, and that departed at amazing speed towards the east. A couple of seconds later it came back, hung there, and then off it went again, and I never saw it return.
Possible that it's some sort of drone or daughter craft that's come out of this main object, you think? I
think, you know, it gave that impression to me that this was something, you know.
Right.
But shortly after that, the object itself vanished and appeared further to the west. Much to my amazement, I was able to pick it up again.
Right.
And
so when you say vanished, you didn't actually see it move off in any particular direction?
No.
It went out?
It went out.
It went out, and then how many degrees further away was it then when it's reappeared?
In degrees, I would probably say about 3.5 degrees further west.
Right.
And it moved a total of, I think, 4 times over the sighting, each by 3 or 4 degrees before it finally...
And can you estimate what that distance was that it moved in those 3 degrees? Have you got a feel for how far away it was?
No, I tend to be... I have no idea of the size of it, so trying to estimate how far away it was is very difficult without knowing its size. And the other way around, of course, you know, this is a very
so you wouldn't have any impression as to whether it was, let's say, bigger or smaller than a car?
Only by the fact that the few clouds that were up there were drifting past it, which obviously ruled out a balloon of some kind then, because you know, the clouds were happily going past while it just sat there. So given that it was obviously higher than the clouds, it must have been quite a distance off. It's just moving continuously to the west from here, around 3 or 4 degrees at a time. But that's it really. It was very difficult to try and put any kind of...
Did you read about it in any newspapers or any local chat about it? You've not found anyone else?
Funnily enough, following your link to the other chap in Slough who had a similar thing, I paid my brother a visit as a fellow amateur astronomer. He lives over in Eton, who a couple of days after my sighting saw a bright light. This was in darkness. It was just a bright light to him, very bright light, but it behaved in exactly the same way. It hopped. It would wink out and appear, but this time moving more to the north from his position.
Yeah, I did a search on the internet after Peter gave me his sighting, and just to see if there'd been any similar sightings, and I did find one. I mean, we don't know the credibility of that particular sighting, but it was in Slough, and it was a very similar description, would you say? The object then that you've drawn here appears to have 3 spheres in it. And is that the impression that you got?
That's the impression.
Right. So perhaps in some orientations it would look like a,
yes,
like a dumbbell.
It was rotating. I could see that now and again it would rotate, and that would change the aspect of it. Like initially at first it was a dumbbell, but there seemed to be a disc shape underneath to it.
Right, so like a disc with 3 spheres on it rotating.
Yeah, very
right. And you sat and did these sketches when you were observing it?
It struck me as odd because I seemed to be looking at the top of it, if you can see from there, even though it was up in the sky, it seemed to be tilted, that I could see more to the top of it than what I considered would be the underneath.
Right.
Very, very bizarre.
Right. Did you hear any noise with it at all?
No
you
noise.
were probably a fair distance from it though.
I would say that. I mean, obviously the lack of aircraft noise was the thing that drew my attention.
And what's your own feeling as to what it might have been? Do you think it's a man-made thing? Your own personal feeling on that?
No, I don't believe it's man-made at all.
Right. Okay.
Not the way it just hung there.
Right. And have you got any plans to attach video equipment to any of your telescopes?
Following our emails, yes. I'm actually discussing with my 2 brothers an instrument package that hopefully we'll be able to show it in other wavelengths besides visible light.
Right.
So infrared, if there's any heat, if there's 2 exhausts, then it's obviously a jet.
Right.
Just to basically eliminate whatever we can. So we're currently working on this little thing. We've even given it a name. But
all right. In the hope that it's going to reappear.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was good 2 years since I last saw anything weird up there. So
tell us about that. What you've seen previous.
That again, it was the aircraft movements that drew me to it, because obviously you get very familiar with how they move over here, and one thing you notice every now and again, one of them will turn very sharply, and you think, that's obviously felt in the cabin. Why has it done that? And I started to see if there was anything where it would have been, the aircraft. And this particular time there was an object which I could only describe as a globule of liquid metal. I mean, it was so shiny.
Right.
Again, through the binoculars, the 7x50s, I followed this as it came over my garden. It was very high up, moving to the south. And as it entered the airspace over Heathrow, it started to turn east. And lo and behold, in the field of view, 2 brown dots or objects came into the field of view. The whole lot turned and headed off east, and I lost sight of them.
Right.
As to what the 2 brown, I instantly thought at the time military, but when I thought about it afterwards, I was not so sure. They're kind of.
So this object, do you think that may have been picked up at the airport on the radar?
Well, I can only speculate. Obviously, the lack of the aircraft up there told me it was on somebody's radar. They're vectoring aircraft away. Obviously, the pilots are not going to question. They're just going to turn as the traffic controllers tell them.
I see.
And they'll just acknowledge that, Roger.
Right.
They won't say, you're turning, you avoid a flying saucer or something. So they probably have no idea. But
you think there's maybe a very tiny group, or whoever is in charge of air traffic control is in the loop to a degree with regards unexplained objects, you think?
I believe that, I believe that they they're well aware of these things, and obviously pilot testimonies must be testimonies. So
Yeah,
it must be one of the.
I had a military radar operator come to me not long ago at one of my talks, and he said, "Yeah, Richard, we see things fairly regular, and we're told to play them down and keep it to ourselves." So yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject for me. I've seen a lot of strange stuff up there, as I've said to you before. I'd like to know what they are, and you know, as to whether these people are in the loop or just simply don't want the hassle is another matter. But
Yeah. All right, Peter. Well, thanks for giving me your account, and thanks very much for talking to Richplanet.
well, thank you for having me, Richard.
That's all for tonight, and remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.
Meh. Oi!
Richplanet Television is sponsored by mousemesh.co.uk, protecting air bricks in homes from uninvited guests.